Hello, I'm No02, and we're going to be talking about early game capture orders and fighting, and how that can result in economy and a whole slew of options. And in order to do that, I'm going to begin with a story. The story of these three units right here. We're on Twin Beaches, and I have a Pathfinder, and a Rifleman squad. This Pathfinder up in the north, they began their life as a scout, and they were beautifully transformed like a butterfly into Pathfinders, and they began capturing this fuel, and they captured this munitions point. And now they're here just beginning to capture this strategic point. While that was happening, we built a scout out of the HQ and began building a barracks. A scout eventually was also born as a beautiful Pathfinder, and they walked out and they captured this strategic point here. And you can see they are just about finished capturing this munitions point right here in the middle. And as they were in the middle of capturing this munitions point, the rifleman was born. Beautiful. There were six of them. Mom and dad were scared, but they began running out. And you can see now that as this Pathfinder is just about finished capturing this munitions point, it's going to line up quite nicely for these two units to arrive at this fuel point together. Two units means more combat effectiveness. This capture order has us looking for a fight. In fact, this capture order has us potentially skipping our own fuel. This Pathfinder could be over here at the fuel, part way done capturing the fuel. So in theory, we have to a degree sacrificed a little bit of potential fuel economy to fight for the center fuel. But really what we're looking for here is to get a retreat on an enemy army. This capture order has us grouping units together so that we can win a more decisive fight. Why? Why is that valuable? Some things to think about here. Let's think about how winning an early fight, or winning fights in general, can result in economy. One, as armies fight, they're dealing damage to each other. And as one army begins to win, the other army's damage begins to decrease because models are getting injured, vehicles are backing out because they need to be repaired, they don't want to risk them. Essentially, as two armies fight and one begins to win and one begins to lose, the losing army, their potential damage output gets reduced and reduced and reduced. And the winning army, well, they're taking less damage, which means they're going to survive with more models, which means that they're going to have a healthier armory at the end of it. The losing army needs to get out before they take too much damage. Essentially, though, between a winning army and a losing army, the losing army has to go back home, and typically their manpower expense to repair their army will typically be higher than the army that won. Thus, there's a manpower discrepancy there. Essentially, you can say that that's a little bit of economy gained. In addition to that, though, in this game, Company of Heroes 3 and all Company of Hero games, map control is also economy for our munitions, for our fuel. So the winning army, not only did they take less damage, which is going to be cheaper to repair manpower wise, usually, not only that, they are still on the map and they can now capture a victory point, decap a enemy point, or capture a contested resource in the middle and begin to hold it. That again results in an additional economy. Slow burning over time, but economy is economy. That's the way it works in Company of Heroes 3. And we can clearly see how winning fights directly correlates with an increased economy or an economic advantage over our opponent. Next, think about how capture orders that end with your army group together. So if winning fights is economy, if we can group our army together and win more decisive fights, because keep in mind that we're talking about the early game here. There's a limited amount of units on the map, 2 to 3 to 4, depending on who your opponent is and what faction you're playing as and all that stuff. But if we can group our units together, we can basically win more decisive fights in the early game, into economy, into map control. And thus, think about now how winning early fights opens up options. Let's imagine the scenario here. Rifleman, the Pathfinder right here, they're up here, start capturing the fuel. They show up with one unit right here, and maybe they were slow to capture the middle, or they do show up with a second unit. Either way, to some degree, maybe their capture order didn't lend itself as nicely as ours did, but we'll have two units versus one, and then maybe a second that shows up. That's a combat advantage to our point, and then this third unit can show up a little bit later, and we got a 3v2, things like that. And this can be especially punishing if our opponent captured this fuel down here, because now one of their 3 early game units is over here, not involved in the fight at all. Thus, the option that we earn here is that if we win this fight and force our opponent to retreat, we have 3 units at this fuel point. What do we do with them? We can send one Pathfinder up and start capturing the munitions. We can decap this if he's gotten it. And we can potentially challenge this strategic point right here, or just take the munitions in the center. We can either be aggressive and attack a weak point, or sort of more control, defensive, and just spread out and capture resources that we can hold for some amount of time. We can capture these 2 at the same time and the strategic point, and then regroup. And keep in mind as well, a second rifleman and eventually a third will be coming out and capturing on the beach and things like that. You can sort of just see if we win a fight, it gives us options. Whether you want to be defensive or aggressive, winning that early fight will give you space for your units to either capture things or to attack a strategic point or a cutoff or take something from your opponent and help dictate the pacing of the game and things like that. So, how do we practice this? How do we practice this? One, practice a capture order where 2 to 3 units arrive together. It's sort of that simple. You can do this in skirmish mode versus the AI. But really, what you're looking for is to see if this capture built at this time, this unit built at this time, capturing this thing in conjunction with this other unit built at this time, capturing this other thing. Do they arrive at this point in the middle, roughly the same time, so that they can help each other in a fight? You can do that against the AI. Keep in mind that versus the AI, that they don't always seem to capture in the most logical way and like to sort of stand at their early capture points for a certain amount of time. That won't necessarily always reflect where your army might be encountering an enemy army. But the point is, practice a capture order where you have multiple units showing up at the same area at relatively the same time. And if you do end up getting into a fight, and after you win the fight, practice being aggressive, practice going deeper, taking more, trying to force a fight somewhere else again, or practice being control. Practice you win the fight, you get the contested point, and then spread out. Go separate. Go control things. Go capture something else that you didn't capture that you skipped already, and play around with these ideas. Figure out what you like best. Keep in mind too, what's really important about this, the sort of the beauty of Company of Heroes, is that maps are a big factor in whether or not this concept works or not, or how strong this concept can be. From each map, you'll have different capture orders naturally, and that will sort of naturally lend itself to how units might be moving around the map. And uh, does this capture order skip too much for getting 2 units to one place? And if we do win the fight, are the 2 units that won the fight, are they actually really far away from anything relevant? And so things to think about and things to practice. And as you practice them, you sort of get a feel and see how this sort of concept plays out on different maps. Also, too, I would say practice skipping a resource capture to go fight for one, right? And sort of the great example here on Twin Beaches is that we skip the fuel. We could be capturing this fuel earlier, so in theory, this could be a sort of fuel loss. But our next rifleman that will come out will go fight for that fuel, and we're getting the contested fuel. So we're skipping this fuel right here to get this fuel in the center, and that sort of will end up with the same result. We're only missing out on fuel gain for, whatever, 10, 15 seconds. It's not the end of the world. And if we can control the center and then still get our own fuel, which is our own half of the map, so it should be easier to fight for this than our opponent will have any, than our opponent. It should ultimately result in a fuel gain greater than our opponent's. And if we do win a fight, we even have the option of potentially harassing their fuel point, though that's a little deep for my liking. So things to practice, things to think about. Think about just how, in general, winning a fight means that you get more economy. Winning a fight, maybe your 1v1 fight, one squad versus another, maybe you win it. But what if you had 2 units there? You win it even harder. You take even less damage and you deal more damage more quickly. And then you can still spread out and capture different things. So that's early game capture order and fights. Some general ideas just to remember is that, again, this is going to vary dramatically from map to map and faction to faction. And in a lot of ways, this is a deep rabbit hole of where I could go from map to map and faction to faction and show you a capture order that works for each of those factions on each of the maps. But here we're talking about the idea, the concept. I want you guys to understand and have a layer of knowledge, of like a foundation of principles, a truism of how fighting is economy and Company of Heroes 3. And once you understand that principle and you start thinking about the game in those ways, you make decisions for yourself. You can come up with build orders for yourself. And so here, I'm trying to give you the fishing rod, so to speak, right? So to speak, right? If you feed a man a fish, you feed him a day, and then if you teach him how to fish, you can feed him for life, right? That's the idea here. So play around with this, think about it. Let me know in the comments what you think about this idea. Am I wrong? Am I right? I think I'm right. Thank you guys for watching. I appreciate it, and I will see you in the future.